My name's Aileen Shackell. I'm a landscape architect. I've been a landscape architect for over 20 years now, designing children's play areas. Today we're going to think just a little while, for 10 minutes, we're going to think about the difference between what we experienced as in our own childhoods and the sort of places we played in, and what children play, where children play today, and where they might be able to play. So we're going to talk quickly about the context, what I'm calling the play spectrum, which we'll find out in a minute. We're going to think a little bit about the different sorts of settings for play, and this thing called playable space. And we're going to start now. So context, this is London in the 1940s, I think. The street was our playground, was the motto. And this, I'm not that old, but this is very much my childhood experience of playing in the street all day and being dragged home at tea time by my mother. So what is play? Well, these children, they're not doing anything particular, are they? They're just having a nice time. They're mooching around, they're chatting, they're making up games. There are no adults in the vicinity telling them what to do. They're just having a good time. Because play doesn't just happen in play areas, does it? And we've got in this bizarre situation now where our default response to play is being to create a fenced compound for our children. This is rather a lot better, I think. Play streets have a long and honourable history in the United Kingdom, and there's a little bit of history down that side. 1938 we started, 1946 1.4 million cars in Britain, scroll down to 1999, 2 million cars in London, which is terrifying. And obviously play streets are back in vogue now, and there are lots of play street projects nationally, which are very successful. Just in the context of the lack of access to street play now, in most places, this is a lovely graphic from the Daily Mail. Any Daily Mail readers here? Don't believe everything you read in the Daily Mail, but this is true, I think. So this is 4 generations of access to the outdoors. So the big one, this is what the great-grandfather went when he was 8. This is where the grandfather went when he was 8. The one at the top, that's where the mother went when she was 8. That's her radius of access. And that tiny, pathetic dot there, that's where the poor 8-year-old goes now. So this is the context for why it's so important to provide quality play for our children. So how have we responded to this? Well, in some places, on the right-hand side, the default option is to provide what we call, what Helen Woolley in Sheffield University calls a KFC playground. KFC, so kit, fence, carpet. And that's what I'm calling, that's at the far end in terms of play design, in terms of lots of design, but I don't design playgrounds like that. In terms of what I call the play spectrum and designing for play, it can go all the way from the very, very simplest intervention on the left, which would be, by the way, remember not to stump grind the stump, but leave it there as a seat. And that's very, very low key, isn't it? Through the design spectrum in terms of design intervention, through to what we have in the right-hand side. And what I'm going to argue today, for the next 8 minutes, is that we should be doing more of the stuff on the left and less of the stuff on the right. So where do we do this? Playable space is the first thing I'd just like to remind everybody about, which is basically that children want to play everywhere, and children do play everywhere. Sadly, in a lot of places, we don't like them playing everywhere, and in lots of the public domain, design measures are taken to design out children's play. So you'll see seating with little bars on to stop people skating on them, and all sorts of stuff going on. Seats that are designed not to play on, whatever. There are lots of different ways of making, creating what I would call playable space. So introducing a playful edge to our environment. And it can be as simple as what's been done here. So creating a playful boundary. This is actually along the edge of a play area to keep the dogs out rather than put a fence up. And the interesting thing here is that that's quite high actually, isn't it? But they didn't worry about that. Or how about creating some lovely little recesses in the landscape? So what are these for? You know, they don't have a name, but you can do lots of different things in them. And this tiny little grass verge along the car park has become playful with quite a simple design intervention. And this is about as simple as it gets. This is a lovely project in Mile End Park, which is well worth Googling. So the woman who designed it is called Penny Wilson. She's a very talented lady, and the project is called Liminal Spaces. And this is just a gate in the middle of a glade, which is like something from a fairy tale, and prompts all sorts of nice games, but it's very simple and cheap, and it's made the park more playable. And then we mustn't forget the boulders, which make lovely seats. But moving on to things like town centres, you would not believe how long I spent trying to find images of play in town centres. In the UK, we seem to be really, really bad at this. If you go to Scandinavia or Germany, it'll be a lot better. But it's creeping in now, and in the City of London, there are some quite good examples. This is a timber play scheme, and it's some low-level roundabouts, which actually sit really quite nicely in terms of the urban setting, I think. This is a scheme which a colleague of mine was involved in, and it's along one of the busiest roads out of East London, and it's not a nice place to sit. But with just the addition of something really very simple, you've started to create a place and somewhere which can either be sittable on or for balancing on, because these poles, they move up and down like that. The Olympic Park, there's been some beautiful things in the Olympic Park. This is the Olympic Park setting, so this is the retail area, and they put some extra seats in, and they could so easily have not put these the right distance apart, but they've been very cleverly distanced, so you can actually jump from one to the other. And it would have been really easy to have got that wrong, but it's a really nice little touch. Housing areas are probably the setting which is most important to get right for play, because my personal feeling is that everybody, all children from a young age, should be able to go to a play area or play space by themselves, independently, without having to be taken there by an adult. And these areas here we're looking at very close to the housing, so the parents can look down on them playing. It's a shared space, so it's not stuff for play equipment, and you can do anything you want there. You can do your homework on the tables, you can pretend the cow is your friend. It was sponsored by Kerrygold Butter, so that's why there's a cow. And best of all, there's a sign saying play priority area, which actually makes it explicit that children are welcome there. This is another little thing, a relatively modest-sized oak tree laid on the ground in the middle of a housing area on a tiny little grass verge. And yes, it's great for climbing on and extending your balancing skills, but it's also fantastic space to just sit and meet your friends. By the way, don't try and do this without involving an expert, because even I get into trouble doing this. Hard work it is. Another housing space. Water play is a fabulous thing to include in spaces in terms of play, especially if you can include sand alongside it. And this is a very, very cheap, very low-tech water play design, which actually has an enormous amount of play value for children and will engage them in games for hours and hours and hours on end. And then we mustn't forget the parks and open spaces. Tree swings are actually creeping back in now, and this was a swing that a colleague of mine worked with in Brighton on a lovely old plane tree, and it's a really nice way of introducing play into a park without going back to that hideous default option of the KFC playground. Because I think the great thing about play in open spaces is that you should be playing in the open space. And the minute you put in a KFC playground with a fence around it, you're in a fence. And the great thing about a tree swing is that you're in the air, which is lovely, actually. You're in the space, you're in the air, you're hanging from the tree. It's lovely. This is an example of where just one single piece of play equipment, because I'm not anti-play equipment, one single piece of play equipment can actually make all the difference in terms of placemaking, and can actually create, if it's set inside a landscape which has been nicely designed, you actually get a place which is very playable in, even just using quite a small range of materials and in quite a small space. You wouldn't really think that an area next to a car park would have much going for it for play, but it's really worked here. And this is another Scottish scheme. This is a funny one, actually, because it's a huge park, but it's taken up almost entirely by football pitches. And there's a tiny little strip all the way around the edge, which was the only space available for play. So what's been done is that there's a whole series of little mini spaces all the way around, which link together to make a play trail all the way around the edge. And it's a really lovely little scheme. It wouldn't win huge design awards, but it really, really works for play. And the last one in the images, it would have been so easy to just leave this grass verge where it is. But, and this wouldn't win any design awards. I probably wouldn't put it on my website if I designed it, but I would be so proud of having made the effort to get some sand into a park where there wasn't any. This is in Islington, by the way. And also to have been considerate enough to put some boulders around the edge where you can take your socks off and put them back on again. So, play will happen everywhere, regardless of what we do, but we still have a duty to remember to make the public domain child-friendly. And what we're about as play designers is not about creating little fenced compounds that you wouldn't put your dog in, but making the wider landscape enjoyable and accessible and welcoming. Thank you very much.